All right. Hi, everyone. And just so our everyone knows, oh,
You're
look
at
at
the
that
beach.
background. So I'm recording people now in gallery view. And for those of you who haven't like watched any of this before, I'm Lindsay. I live outside of Boston. And Becky, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Becky and I live in southern New Hampshire.
And then Sumana, do you want to say a little bit about yourself since this is your first
Sure,
time on here?
sure. I'm Sumana, and I live in well, I guess it would be called Central Massachusetts. And I work in higher education, and I'm the mother of two mostly fabulous boys.
That
And
you've been locked at home with for the
I've
last
been
month.
locked at home with, and actually, I'm like really, I'm like, I think about this often. Like we have not killed each other, and I think we're actually, it's like what happens is like we all do our own thing, and then we'll just like converge at different points in the day.
How old are your little ones?
So one is fairly little, I would say, right? He's 9, and then the other one is not little at all. He's 15. So he's going to be a sophomore in high school.
Uh-oh.
Right now, I'm pretty sure he's still sleeping, actually. So,
Oh, be a teenager again, right? I'm up at 6:30 every day these days. I can't even imagine sleeping this late. That's amazing.
No. And I do that without an alarm clock too. So
Yeah.
that's just where I am at this stage in my life.
Yeah.
And
6:20 I wake up, but the alarm goes off at 6:30 and I'm like, why did I lose those 10 minutes?
oh my
Lindsay,
goodness.
I have to ask because
Sure.
my background is really, I mean, Becky has the best sort of background, I feel like.
Oh, this is my childhood library that my mother sent to me months
I love
ago. Actually, a year ago. I finally got it on a bookshelf. So now I have
Oh,
all
I
of
love
my
it.
childhood books,
Well, all the
including
colors, I love the colors.
ones I wrote myself.
Yes.
Why does that stuff still exist, dude?
I don't know, but every single one is it's very clear I had an anxiety disorder back then because every single book is dedicated to my grandmother who died a long time ago in the right? And I
Oh,
even drew her gravestone on one of the
no.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
see my anxiety around death and feeling alone very, very evidently. But mental health wasn't the same thing that it was back then. So
Well,
they were just like, she's still sad. But
did,
no one thought.
did
No.
you have did anyone in your circles have the language for it back then?
I don't think so. I really don't. But it was looking back, it was very apparent that I had a general anxiety disorder in first grade. There
Oh.
was an extended period of time where I carried around a photo album full of all of the people and pets in my life that I didn't want to die while I was at school. And
Oh.
I would cry for a decent bit every day. Of course, when I was in first grade, it seemed like it was forever that I was crying every morning. But they would put me in a chair behind a wall of filing cabinets. And then my friends could all hear me crying because they were on the other side of the filing cabinets, but I would just sob. And then eventually they let me go to the office to call my mom and dad to make sure they were still alive. Why was that not a sign of a generalized anxiety disorder? But again, I don't think they had the language for it back then. That was in the early 90s.
So it's because I've known you for a while, maybe like tail end of 2013 or so, and we've worked together. I've actually worked with Sumana before somewhere else, but like when did you or the people around you have
Somewhere
the
else.
what?
Somewhere else.
Somewhere else,
We
yeah.
work together somewhere else.
Look it up. like so to protect the innocent. But yeah, so but no, because even when I knew you at first, Becky, it wasn't necessarily evident right away. I think part of it is that we were in a high pressure environment anyway, so it's kind of, I mean, and maybe also just my own lack of education. So
Yeah,
when
but
did
also 20 years of learning coping strategies that in many cases were incredibly unhealthy. That's why you didn't notice because of
Why cope? Why?
unhealthy
Like you were
coping
like, were you like, did you do like toxic? Like, were you like, did you self medicate or something?
Yeah, I did a lot of drinking. A
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
drinking.
no, totally. Yeah.
A lot of drinking. That was my main self-medicating.
Yeah.
But I got into therapy actually right before I met you, Lindsay. That's when I finally decided to start therapy. And
Nice.
wow, I learned a lot about myself. And now it's like I'm just peeling back the layers of the onion still all these years later, but it's so good. And anyone watching this, if you're go find a therapist if your health insurance covers it. It's so good. Like, it sucks at the beginning because it's like dating, and dating kind of sucks too, but you got to find someone you jive with. And I strongly encourage everyone to see a therapist. I feel like everyone in therapy says that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, like, I'm a believer in that too. It's funny enough, like where Becky and I worked, I felt like that was the first office where people were just, I'm sure I've worked in other offices where all people, like, well, maybe not all people, some people saw a therapist, but they just wouldn't state it out loud. And I just remember we would have, Becky and I were on the same team, and you know, someone on our team would just be like, oh, oh, I can't make X meeting because I have to go to my therapy session, or da-di-da. And it was said just so nonchalantly that it was normalized in a way that I don't think it is in most workplaces. And so actually, when I think about the pandemic now, I don't know. I think, you know, I don't know how many of us are in places where stuff like that gets normalized. I mean,
oh yeah, I talk about the fact that I have a therapist with my high school students sometimes, and they're like, what is a therapist? I'm like, it's a person you can go to that's not your parents or your best friend, who can give you like honest feedback and help you build strategies so you can like be the person you are deep inside and make strides to being who you want to be. Like, it's a wonderful thing. And they're like, oh, I thought just like really sick and crazy people went to therapy. But it's great that, you know, there's kids in my class that see therapists, but I try to normalize it as something that is part of healthy self-care. And it should be part of every health insurance plan, because your brain and your well-being is it impacts your entire health so dramatically. So
well, but I have to say that, to Lindsay, to your point, that, you know, sometimes people use stuff like that as a crutch too, right? So there's two different people. Like, I know personally, I like do not put my life out. You know, I don't wear my life on my sleeve, right? Like, I'm uncomfortable with that, right? And maybe we could talk about that. Why am I uncomfortable? I don't know, right? Yeah. But I will say, so just in general, I would be one of the more private people. Like, if I was seeing somebody or whatever, I may not mention it. But then you have other people, and this doesn't just go for therapy, it goes for medical conditions or really anything, where, you know, they talk about it all the time. Yeah. And so I wonder, and I don't know. I mean, it could just be that they're really comfortable talking about it and sharing, and, you know, people are different, but then sometimes it gets to the point where they're using it, I feel like, as like what I said, like as a crutch, like something that they hide behind, if that makes sense.
Are you talking about the health condition or the therapy, or?
I'm talking about both of those things, right? Okay. Because mind and body are linked, right?
For sure.
As Becky reiterated, right? So it could be anything. But maybe if they have a chronic condition or something like that, and they just, you know, they're very open with it and they talk about it all the time. Do you guys know what I mean? Like, do you know people like that?
No, and I think for no, but it's interesting, right? Because like on these chats, I've mentioned, people know, like, I've been diagnosed with breast cancer. I've been active treatment this year. Yeah. But it's funny, even though I do these video chats, it's not like I necessarily speak about it with anyone and everyone in other circles. I mean, yes, in theory, someone could click on this link, click on that video, or, you know, check out my blog and like one of my blogs and like see that I talk about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's necessarily because I hide it per se. It's more just like sometimes when I am in certain circles, like let's say a work setting or whatnot, I kind of want a space where I don't have to think or talk about it, right? I mean, my own self-care is sometimes that compartmentalization. So yeah, I do think, because then if and I think there are spaces where I might bring it up, but even then I think it's not like also a matter of sharing versus not sharing. I also think it's like, what level of disclosure do you want? Like, I think it's one thing for someone to know, like, oh yeah, I've been going through active cancer treatment. It's another for me to like, like give the narrative of how each and every appointment went, when I don't, like, even with some of my good friends, I don't necessarily do that. Is that, I mean, but that's what you're talking about, right?
I'm talking about when people bring it up and there's like really no like relevance. You know what I mean? To anything that's being talked about at that time.
For me,
almost,
like, I wear my life on my sleeve. I'm the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Right. I actually give a lot of, I actually am going to be doing my first national conference next week. I'm so excited. And I help teach other teachers how to support students with anxiety disorders.
Nice.
And I talk about it with my friends because I need them to know that simply, like, for example, I was going to go socially distance with one of my friends the other day. And like leading up to it, she was like, I know right now you're probably not wanting to come, but just push through. You're going to be so happy when you get here. Just push through that uncomfortableness. So knowing that I have my friends understand that simply getting out of the house for me sometimes is really hard. Or if I'm avoiding an email or a text, like, they don't take it personally, but they reach out with love and compassion, which makes it so much easier for me to work through it, because my anxiety affects literally every second of every day for me. So I'm very open. I talk about it with my students. It's just because I know that people might look at me and say, why is she doing that? Or why is that was a weird reaction, but it helps people to understand that holistic version of myself that sometimes might come off the wrong way if you don't understand the context. So Becky, I don't say, hi, I'm Becky and I have anxiety, but
but Becky, but that's exactly, so I mean, but that makes sense to me, right? Mm-hmm. Because of how you explained it, right? Like, that makes total sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that, especially for social interactions, and I mean, one of the things that you talked about, like, I've done some reading on, right? Like, when people like don't always jump to the conclusion that like people are blowing you off, there might actually be something deeper going on, right? Yeah. And in those situations, I would absolutely want to know, especially as a friend, and in order to build like a healthy, long-lived relationship with somebody, right? That's absolutely something that I want to know. I'm talking more about like when people, like, there's no reason to really put everything out there and people do anyways. And that's just me, Becky. Like, that makes me feel uncomfortable.
That was what I was going to ask. Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Does it make you feel responsible? Does it? Yes. Yeah. And I totally hear that. That is 100%. Like, I think that, I don't know how to specifically respond, but I totally hear what you're saying there.
So when you're saying responsible, Sumana, it means like now you have, is it like, oh geez, what do I say now in response to this?
What do I do with this info
that somebody shared with me? Yeah.
And so I'm the type of person, okay, like everyone's different, right? But it's good to talk about this, right? But like, I'm the type of person, like, if I'm at work, like, that's my work face. Like, game on. Lindsay, you know this.
Yeah, I've seen your game on face.
I wish I could do that.
We work together at that place.
Yeah. No, for sure.
But people may misinterpret that as like, I don't care, or I'm being cold, or I'm not a sharer, or whatever. It's not that. It's just like, I don't know, like, when I'm at work, I just want to work.
I mean, and also it's not like everyone's work style like is going to be different. And I mean, even if we're talking about like Becky's talking about how she wears her heart on her sleeve. I mean, when I worked with her, it's not like this terminology was front and center when we're talking. I mean, it's about like when and where somebody feels comfortable, when it makes sense. It kind of reminds me of, so like last month, I mean, obviously we all know about George Floyd and all these endless cases of
murder.
yeah, murder, to say the least. And so, you know, so if you know me, you know that I love Conan O'Brien, and I feel like this is now a time.
Surprise to me. I still remember the day that you told me how much you love Conan O'Brien. I was like, Conan?
Yes, I do love him. And so, you know, I think it's just like a lot of talk show hosts now are like, they're feeling like this responsibility to bring on more Black guests and talk about these racial issues. And I recently, like I want to say it was last month, he had W. Kamau Bell come on. And, you know, W. Kamau Bell was talking about how, you know, he gets paid, like talking about race and all this stuff, he gets paid to do this, but he was just saying that, you know, in other workplaces, you know, that, I don't know, he just mentioned some other random role. I don't remember if it was accountant or who knows what. That's not that person's job, right? And so I think, Becky, when you talk about it now, you feel like it's more central to like the mission of your work, where maybe when you were working with me, it didn't feel like as easy a fit, right?
Now it is literally the heart and soul of everything I do, because so many of my students have IEPs and 504s, and individualized education programs. For those who don't know, those are court mandated individualized education programs that teachers work in conjunction with students, parents, and support staff, mental health, psychologists, to help develop an educational program for that student. And so in any given class, I normally have somewhere between 5 and 10 IEP students, or 504, which is another type of disability accommodation. And most of them are anxiety disorders, almost all of them. So
yeah. But I guess, no, I mean, so for your situation, it makes sense. Like, so Sumana, in yours, when you're like, okay, those people who just bring it up, but it's like, dude, what does this have to do with anything? How do you manage that then? Where you're like, this person felt the need to share something.
Yeah, right. I mean, it makes me feel so awkward. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'll be like, okay. I mean, I don't know. The thing is like, okay, so I'm saying this, but at the same time, people tell me stuff all the time. So I must not be like giving off a vibe where I'm like, this makes me feel awkward, right? So I'm not doing that, clearly.
You're too welcoming.
People at, you know, whatever, for whatever reason, and it's always been this way for me my entire life, people will just find me and talk to me and tell me really personal things. Right? And
in many ways, also a curse.
Right.
No, I get it.
Because sometimes I'm like, oh, really? That person just said that to me. And it's not my friends, right? Because my friends are different.
Yeah.
Right? You know, we have that relationship, but it could just be colleagues or whatever. And I'll be like, I didn't know we talk like this to each other. So it just makes me feel awkward.
No.
But that's okay. Like, I don't think that awkwardness is a bad thing, because it's my dog is whining to be lit in. So 1 second, I'm going to go let her in.
Oh, I want to see her.
Aw, that's like the closest I'll get to a dog.
Okay, so while Becky's doing that, I need to ask you a question.
Sure.
What is this background that you've got going on? It's your fridge.
Because
hangs in front of her.
I'm just saying, my background sucks too. You know what people at work tell me about this? That I'm being held prisoner somewhere. And they want me to like, every time I have a meeting and I'm here, right? This is just where my desk is. They want me to hold up like a newspaper article that says the date on it, because they literally think that I'm like being held captive.
No. Okay, I'll tell you what this is.
But what is your excuse?
So you have been to my apartment before.
Yes.
And you may or may not remember this, but there already is this small table built into the counter.
Right.
And it's opposite of the fridge. And so the other options in the kitchen are like, oh, do you want to see my sink? Do you want to see my dish rack? And then as we get to the studio, let's see, is there stuff that I don't want seen? But like, okay, there's my bed, okay? Like, this is studio life, and I don't know. I feel like
that's fair. That's fair.
There needs to be a boundary between my bedroom and this conversation. I don't know. Now that sounds weird, but yeah, like I do have a sit stand desk, but with the way my office chair and table are like, and the sit stand desk are aligned, they just don't match up. So when I'm on that sit stand desk, it's really, I'm standing. And then if I want to sit down, I come to the kitchen. But then this is, if I wanted to type, this would not be the place I'd be. I'd have to go to the sit stand desk that is usually me in the standing position. So
that's a lot of movement and mobility going on in your day, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. So actually Becky and I were working together when I really had the need for more of these things, like for like my wrist and who knows whatever issues with typing. Like
that whole process. I still remember the bureaucracy.
Yeah. And I honestly, I don't know if I've ever, I mean, I've heard that this is, because people know I work in higher ed. I have heard that in other industries, they are just faster about giving you the accommodations. Like, oh, you need a sit stand desk. You need a footrest. You need a chair that's, that has a lumbar rest. When I talk to like people in more of corporate spaces, it sounds like very, very quick. Like there's someone that orders it or uses it. And then I'm someone who's worked at a combination of like nonprofits, some of them smaller, as well as higher ed. And I feel like in nonprofits, it's like, especially small ones, it's like, get your own stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I worked for a public school district. It was that same situation too. I don't know what it's like now. And in higher ed, I mean, there is a process, but you're right, Becky. Like, I don't know if I could single out like one employer. Like, it's like this paper signed by that person, this medical form, not a medical note. Or sometimes at some places they're like the medical note's okay. And yeah, like actually with where I worked with Becky, it took months. I'm not even going to say it was like it was definitely not.
You had your braces on all the time and you were absolutely miserable. Like, oh God, I remember that whole mess.
So just now imagine this in a pandemic. If it's because that was like when I worked with Becky, that might've been about 5 to 6 years ago, maybe a little longer. And I can just only imagine now in a pandemic, what does it mean to accommodate people? Because now you are in your home spaces that were not meant to be workplaces.
Well,
like
you know what's funny? You know what's funny to your point? So for-profit companies, I know this because my husband's company did this, literally just gave him a check to make for whatever, and they did it to everybody. It wasn't just him. They gave them a check for, hundreds of dollars to just modify their workspace however they needed to.
And IKEA was all excited because everyone was ordering desks.
Yep.
Oh boy.
But we would never get that. So.
I didn't get a computer upgrade. I was supposed to be running all of my online classes using a Chromebook.
Right. Right. Oh my God.
So I switched to my personal computer and that bit the dust like a week and a half ago. So now I have a brand new fancy computer and it's wonderful.
Oh, good. Well,
I purchased it, so it wasn't through work now.
Yeah, Sumana got happy and she's like, oh, it's coming out of Becky's pocket.
Yeah, well, anyway, that's that.
So do you guys want to touch upon the SNL?
Oh yeah. So just because we are so current, we're commenting on a video from what was it, Becky, 2018?
Oh yeah, it's a couple years old.
You know what would be cool if we could show it.
Can we do that?
I don't know. I mean, we could figure it out for next time, but
we can link it.
Well, yes. So actually,
we'll link it.
Yeah, Becky, you're the one who showed me the video. So why don't you just describe it so that people, because there are people who remember it. I mentioned it to a friend and she was laughing because she knew exactly what clip you were talking about.
It was really funny in a horrific type of way.
In a horrific kind of way. Yes, exactly. So it was like a community meeting at a community center. And it was the Confederates or something like that. I think that was the name of the organization.
It's an Adam Driver episode.
Yeah, see, I don't know the famous people, so thanks for adding in that information. I'm just like person who people know that I don't know because I don't do pop culture stuff. But anyhow, so they end up calling a meeting to talk about what they were going to do for their summer retreat. Because every year, I guess, they go to Williamsburg and re-experience the Civil War, but they were trying to think of a new place to go. And they were envisioning this paradise. They were talking about this paradise where there's only white people everywhere, and the white people pick their own food, and the white people work in the country store, and there's just no black people anywhere. And then one of the guys in the audience raises his hand.
Adam Driver.
And he goes, "Oh yeah, I've been there. Sounds like Vermont." And then like the whole bit just keeps going and going and going. And I think the best part in the whole thing for me, anyhow, given that I lived in Boston, and for me, this is just putting everything into perspective. When I moved to Boston, Boston was the most liberal place I had ever lived. I thought Boston was the most accepting place I'd ever been. I still remember my first year in Boston, I was walking around Boston Common, and they were throwing a giant LGBTQ prom in the Boston Common. It was this big, huge dance party. And I cried because I remember thinking, oh my God, I would never have been comfortable in high school being my authentic self. And looking around at all of these kids just being so accepted and loved. And I was like, wow, Boston's so forward thinking, right? So anyway, Adam Driver, I guess, is the guy who raises his hand and doing the whole thing. And they find out that he's actually from up north. And they're like, oh, no, Yankee people. And he was like, no, it's okay. I'm from Boston. And everyone's like, oh, all right. So that's kind of the whole shtick is this Confederate people are trying to figure out where to spend their summer retreat this year because they're tired of going to Colonial Williamsburg. And they are thinking about going to Vermont.
Right.
And yeah, and I'm originally from Chicago. I don't know if people would have, I think people, even if they haven't been to Vermont, they could hear that and they'd be like, oh, okay, I get it, but then I think certain people may or may not realize like the type of reputation the Boston area has. So I think that's one of those things that could kind of go over someone's head, or they might not get it completely.
But you know what's funny though, to that point.
What?
Oh, I have to mention one other thing before we get into the discussion.
Yeah.
This is pivotal. At the end of the skit, a gentleman walks in to the room, okay?
The custodian
walks into the room. The custodian is Black. And they turn to him and they say, hey, I can't remember, hey, Bill, or whatever his name was, what do you think of this place called Vermont? Would you want to go there or what have you, right? And the custodian looks back at them and says, why the heck would I want to go to Vermont, right? And then walks out. And then everybody cheers, woo, we're going to Vermont.
Yep.
Maybe we should get a Subaru.
That line.
Every neighbor of mine up here in New Hampshire, I swear, has a Subaru. It's oh my God, that whole
that's it. But that's an interesting point, right, Lindsay? To your point and to your point, Becky. I think people, if we said, I don't know why I'm holding two pens, by the way, right now, but I am.
You look very important with two pens.
Right. I'm using them as pointers. But if we talked about New Hampshire, I think everybody would be like, oh, yeah, of course, New Hampshire. But to Lindsay's point, if we talked about, well, Boston, right, which is, supposedly this very liberal, open-minded, progressive state. And in many ways it is. But culturally, we can't forget how the history. And I think it's gotten better over the past 5 years, but it is very racist in Boston.
I want to think in 2018, that was when Boston was voted the most racist city in America too.
And here's
what I think is extra interesting.
Well, here's the thing too. It's because I even remember, and like actually one of my friends who is a Black Bostonian, he was offended and he's like, it's so much worse down south and stuff. And, you know, because he's lived in different states. And I'm like, man, Boston people I think in general can get so protective of the reputation. I mean, because look, I'll give it, like, you know, Becky, you mentioned LGBTQ, like what, you know, wasn't this like Massachusetts was the first state to make it legal, like same-sex marriage. And then, you know, Massachusetts was leading in healthcare, like universal healthcare or near universal, but
in education.
Oh, but those racial disparities, man.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second. So this is typical Boston. This is typical Boston if we look at education, right? So you've got you know that iceberg picture, right? Yep. The tip of the iceberg is above the water and that's what you see. But then it goes very deep down into the ocean, right? And nobody sees those layers. So education is exactly that. In Boston, we're considered leading the country in education, right? But then if you look at the individual communities, who are the ones that are leading at the end of the day, Lindsay? Who are they?
You already know. It's
Boston, Manhattan.
It's more affluent, more white, and if it is in the city, like, you know, Becky mentioned Boston Latin. If it is in the city, it's like, oh, it's that exam school, right? It's not necessarily representative of, say, the larger Boston public schools.
And that is a direct correlation between your zip code and the education that you receive. And, you know, the racial disparity continues to exist there. No one seems to know what to do about any of it.
I used to volunteer at Dorchester Academy.
Yeah.
And this was back in 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. All of the drinking fountains were taped over, and there were signs in the bathrooms and on every drinking fountain saying to not drink the water because the lead levels were too high.
Oh my God.
So then the kids had to go down into the basement where there were those like water coolers. So, and they weren't on every floor. So the kids that I worked with, because I was volunteering with Build in Boston, which is such an incredible organization. I really, really am proud of the work that they do. It's a really, really cool org. But they do promote a lot about college, though. So that was one of the big issues that I had, because I get college is a great option, but not for everybody.
Sure, absolutely.
It's talking about the variety of options, and college is the goal for Build. But anyway, the kids had to literally go down to the basement to go fill their water bottles.
Yeah. When
there's a drinking fountain next to the room, but it's too full of lead, so you can't drink the water. So as a student, how do you even feel like your life is valued when you can't even drink the dang water?
I mean, it also just makes me wonder, like, for people who are like living around that area, like I'm not too far from the area you said, and I'm like, shoot, I've been drinking water straight out of my faucet for years. Like,
have you ever tested your water?
No.
Oh, we test our water every couple of months. I'm on well, but
that's important. I'm on well too, so I drink my water. It's tested. But Lindsay, that's really important. You need to have somebody come out and test that.
You can even grab a kit at Home Depot.
Yeah.
No, it's just so funny because I remember years ago, I had this roommate in Boston who would just drink out, and he's like, yeah, you know, like this is better than most water in the world, la, la, la. So it's like, I also can understand how like someone might hear different things from different people, and who like, and also that's the thing too, who the hell knows that like, oh, there's this kit that exists and la-di-da-di, la-di-da. I don't know.
I know at the Home Depot in Methuen. I think it's the Home Depot in Methuen.
Well, it's also just
when you're walking out of the store, there's literally a giant wall of test kits that say free water test kits, take one home, designed for the city water system of Methuen. Like they literally have it giant on your way out. So but if you're a renter, how often you go to Home Depot? I never understood why Discover offered the 5% cash back at Home Depot, because I was like, who goes to Home Depot enough for that to be worth it? Then I bought a house. I'm there every day.
Oh my God, Becky, I wish you didn't shop there. Can we talk about that for a second?
What about Home Depot?
Do you not have a Lowe's near you could go to as an alternative?
Do have a Lowe's. What's up with Home Depot?
What I understood, they were huge Trump proponents.
This is something I need to
like
look at.
Campaign donations and advocacy and all that type of stuff.
I like Home Depot because I know where things are, but again, this is where my anxiety comes into play. I hate asking people where things are. I love going to Panera because I can walk up to a screen, type in what I want, and just wait for my meal to show up. I don't even have to interact with a human and be worried about that interaction. So Home Depot, I walk in, I know what I'm like. Yeah. No.
Look into it. It may not be anymore, but they were huge.
This is stuff that the power of your money. Like one of the people that I follow on Instagram, she put this thing like, I only buy Ben & Jerry ice cream now. And I'm like, yeah, me too. Because they're like down with the system.
And you know what? I made an assumption, and you could be potentially a Trump supporter, right? So I don't know. But I just wanted to mention that to you.
No, definitely not.
I mean, you could be.
I could be. I live in New Hampshire, and there are ginormous flags that say
we could do an SNL skit about that.
Keep America great.
Becky, the Trump supporter in Southern New Hampshire. But you know what's funny? I always joke around about this because if I wanted like airplay, like on TV or something, I could show up at his rally. He'd put me right there in the center. You know, if I wore that red hat.
It'd be good for optics.
It would be good for optics.
Yep.
You know, like if I wanted to be on TV, I could just be a Trump supporter.
Yeah, I love when I look at his rally video because there's always the most diverse crowd behind him, and they all are wearing the hats. And I'm like, so where did you find all of these people? And honestly, if you wanted to like make a scene, that's a great way to do it. Just consider yourself a Trump supporter and boom, bam. If you're a person of color, you're up front. And then you can be like,
whatever you
Black
want.
Lives Matter.
Yeah. No, seriously, I've thought about it. But then there's an issue where people get beat up, and I kind of want to get beat
Well, I have a lot of friends that bought tickets or reserved tickets for the Portsmouth rally that ended up being postponed, not because they wanted to go, but they were just trying to take away the opportunity for other people to get tickets so less people would show up. Was, I guess, what happened at the other rally with all the K-pop kids. So it was a big thing up here. Everyone was like, make sure you get your tickets. And people are like, are you actually going? Of course not.
It was, how does he say it? It was huge. Gina. That's the other thing he says, Gina.
What? Do I even want to know the context of that?
Instead of China, he says Gina.
Okay, this is why I'm happy I don't have a TV. And I don't get to hear this. Gosh.
Oh my God.
Oh this is how my quality of life has gotten better. Like, just don't roll. Like, when I get my news, it's more through reading, so I don't have to like hear the way things are pronounced.
Yeah, I listen to my NPR in the morning, and I just got a subscription to the New York Times on my Kindle, so I can avoid the scroll problem. So we're gonna see how that works out, because there's no like good newspapers around here. I tried, and it's awful. I can't handle any of the local papers.
What are like good newspapers for you all?
I don't think there are any, because they're all owned by corporate people now. So it's all
I read my news online, right? So I don't have a physical paper. So I don't know if that was part of the question, but I tend to go to sources like BBC.
Me too. Yep. Wow. I do that, NPR, but then I also try to go to sources that aren't as mainstream. Like, I mean, it's not that I won't read a New York Times or Washington Post thing, but it's just, that's not where I'm putting all my attention, right?
That podcast episode I sent you, Linz, from Getting Through It. I don't know if, or Going Through It. I think it's called Going Through It. Wow, what an amazing podcast. It's this woman who interviews other women who are like going through whatever it is they're going through.
Oh,
and
that's neat. I like that.
it's so awesome. And so the one that I just listened to, which I sent to you, Linz, is a woman who went to law school and then realized like she didn't want to be a lawyer because they don't teach you how to think critically about the law, but they just teach you how to use the law as it is, right?
Yeah.
But then there's this one line where they start talking about like how you can be active in the Black Lives Matter movement, especially if you are a person who is not able to actually physically be present because of health things or your personal safety, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things they talked about local news and trying to figure out a way that you can support your local journalists, because no one wants to live in a world where there's no local journalists, because we know that there's more cases like all of these Black men and women who are murdered in cold blood.
I 100% agree with
we
you.
We know there's a ton more stories about Breonna Taylor's out there.
I know.
It's just they're not getting covered.
Yeah.
And so one of the big points was making sure that you are able to support your local news teams. And I even recommended in our town Facebook group that the high school pick up like an actual journalism like program, and they write a local newspaper and cover what are the issues, because
that's a great
our
idea.
Facebook group is horrible. It's not news. It's just screaming at each other.
Well, that's a really good idea. And I would say that, you know, because everybody talks about mass media and sort of manipulation and influence and just telling one side of the story. But, you know, like that saying, all politics is local. And I honestly think all news is local too, right?
Yep.
And the local news is very different from the mainstream sort of stuff that gets funneled into our house 24/7.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of people out with signs about different like offices, and I'm like, wait a second, when is our next election? It's in September. I had no idea that we have an election locally in September.
Yeah.
No idea. But I would pay money to support our local high school students to write a newspaper.
Yeah.
I would subscribe to it. And I even wrote, when I was in high school, my friends and I, we put together a website where we all wrote separate columns, and I was the women's issues column writer, of course. But
so this is what I'll say is that it wasn't until like I got involved in a local group in my town to talk more or like actually take some action around racial justice. And I didn't know that we actually had one town newspaper, because they only do it in print. They do not, even now, they still do not do it online.
whoa.
And I mean, there is a local paper that also has online articles. But no, I guess it just, you know, it's funny that you all mentioned like just local journalists, because yeah, I feel like I'm someone who has a good knowledge of like what's happening globally. But yeah, it isn't until recently I'm like, crap, there's been like this newspaper in print that I was unaware of, because again, why would I don't consume most of my news like that. I mean, I think when I do find out about like local news articles from the one that does go online too, it's just more because I'm part of like local community Facebook groups where sometimes people then share the news. Like Sumana, like for your town, like you say you're in Central Mass, like how much do you look at what's in your town or neighboring towns with the news? Because I mean, you were mentioning BBC and all, but how does that then also balance out with what you have in your surrounding community?
So I really like to, local papers are like fun for me. Like
Okay.
I'll read like the Community Advocate or whatever it is that's going on, because it's just filled with really weird stuff sometimes, right? Like this person is doing this, or, you know, this person is selling this. And it's just neat to like thumb through and see like what people in your community are doing, right? So like I actually like to do that, but I don't know if that's news per se. You know what I mean? Like first off, we're too small to have like my town is too small. I don't even think we have a paper, but what we could do, which I don't even know if it's in print, is like we're part of what's called the boroughs. And there's like 5 of us. You know what I mean? Or
Mhm.
4 of us or 5 of us. And that could certainly be like a community paper.
Yeah, we used to have one here in Pelham. As I heard in the Facebook group when I was asking people where do they get their local stuff. Because again, I just go to Facebook. That's where I interact with all of my neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Especially now.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we used to have a newsletter that went out, but no one wants to do that anymore. And that's why I'm like, why? It would be so cool if someone took that up. Now, if,
Well, people don't pay. I mean, that's the whole part of it, is like the whole newspaper business is struggling, you know? Nobody reads that stuff.
I wonder why though.
Yeah, I know. I know. Well, first off, I know that it's a time issue, right? Like I'd rather, and I'm guilty of this.
Yep.
As much as like, I still like books, like physical books, right?
Mhm.
So I don't do Kindles or anything like that. But I don't think I've picked up a newspaper in like years. You know
No.
what I mean? No, because I'll just go online.
I don't know how to hold a newspaper. For a couple of weeks, I did do a newspaper subscription up here because I was like, maybe this will help me like focus and feel less stressed and not all the links and the stupid ads that are like screaming at me. And I couldn't even figure out how to hold the thing. I'm like, how do people do this? It's so awkward. And then I'm folding it and I used to be a newspaper delivery girl. That was my first job when I was in I was in middle school. I delivered newspapers at 4:00 in the morning.
I was just going to say, you had to get up at like 3.
Yeah.
You're that
On
person.
Sundays, I had to get up at 3 because we had to stuff all the newspapers with the advertisements. So we would be in this room full of like hundreds of people. Well, it wasn't hundreds because it was, but it was probably dozens of people. And we had all of the newspaper stuff that we had to stuff into the Sunday paper. And then you had to put them in those bags. And we had to buy those bags, those plastic bags that they slide the paper into.
Yeah.
The newspaper carriers
in a while.
So we had to buy the bags and we had to stuff all the things. And then I still had to go to school in the morning. So I would be running my mom would drive me and a friend around. And that's how we saved money to go on a trip to New York City with the Erie Youth Symphony. Because I wanted to go, but almost everyone in the Erie Youth Symphony was super wealthy, right?
Yeah.
So there was this ridiculous price tag on this trip. And my friend and I wanted to go, but we didn't have the cash. And so my mom was like, well, looks like we're getting up early and doing a newspaper route. So that's what we did for
I'm glad she supported
in
you.
Erie.
Yeah, I'm glad she supported you in that. Hey, guys, I got a jet because I'm getting calls from my team.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the middle of the workday. So, yeah, no, thanks for coming on, Sumana.
Very welcome.
We loved having you. And you're welcome to come back again whenever you want.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yep. It's good to see you. I mean, it's been nice to hear your voice and all on phone.
It was wonderful meeting you too, Sumana. I hear so much about you from Lynn's, but I've never actually met you in person. I was like, maybe I've met her. No, I haven't.
It's so good to meet you guys, and I would love to come on again. So we'll have to chat. So next week I'm on vacation.
Me too.
You are? Oh wow, so neat.
Staycation.
So I'm actually going somewhere, but they don't want me there, right? So we booked a place in Maine, but Maine is not accepting Massachusetts residents right now because we suck so hard.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I understand.
So I have to either tell them that I've quarantined in Maine for 14 days or supply them with a COVID test that says I'm negative.
Go get a COVID test, or you can come hang out in New Hampshire with me and my 7 chickens.
Yeah, she does have quite a few animals, so you do have
2
that
dogs,
option.
We just got 7 chickens, which is why there's a staycation, because we have to keep a heat lamp on them in my house for the next month.
Where are they?
They're in what was my former office. So I moved my office to the extra room. So they're in a kiddie pool, those like plastic kiddie pools.
Oh my God.
They're so cute.
I love that so much.
Yeah. Well, there you go, Sumana. There's your alternative. Now you can rest easy this weekend knowing there's a backup. All right.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.